listening to the Massage Therapist Development Initiative. I'm Jamie Johnston.
And I am Eric Purvis. This is a podcast by massage therapists for massage therapists.
Our objective is to simplify how to be a more evidence-informed practitioner. Let's dig into this episode. As somebody who just turned 47 years old, I can't quite remember things that happened 40 years ago, but the biopsychosocial model of pain has been around for about 40 years now. And it's very important for us to take a look at anything like this and understand what changes have taken place in 40 years and how have we improved.
And this is actually a really kind of hot topic, really, the biopsychosocial model, and is it like, how do you apply it in practice? And there's a lot of arguments back and forth about, like, it's not a predictable model, right? It's not like a mathematical model. It's a conceptual framework, and the authors in this paper. This paper is called The Biopsychosocial Model of Pain, 40 Years On, Time for Reappraisal. It's in a relatively recent Journal of Pain. And yeah, it's good because I think it challenges or brings into discussion a lot of the points that you hear, especially those of us that spend time reading the debates on social media, and a lot of problems people see in the biopsychosocial. And what I feel is that in my experience, my understanding is the biopsychosocial model is itself not much of a problem, because it seems it's been around, right, for over 40 years in the pain world, longer. I think it first was talked about in 1947 or 1977, I think, by George Engel, and then Lozer, how you pronounce his last name, and Waddell had it, a few years after that. But it's still around, and I think there's still a lot of value to it. But the biggest problem seems to be is how is it used in clinic, or how is it researched? And that's what we'll talk about today. Is in this research paper, or this discussion paper, they talk about how when people use the terms biopsychosocial, oftentimes the studies are just looking at one aspect of it. Mm-hmm. They're not well defining they're not well defining the psychosocial, or what is social, or what is considered in psychological, and in the bio, like when they're looking at bio, what's included in that. So there seems to be lots of gray area there, and I think that's probably when people are critiquing the model, and I think they do have reason to critique it. It's because more often of how the model is applied, rather than the what's the word to use?
The conceptual framework.
The conceptual framework of what the model is supposed to represent, which is just full person care.
Yeah. And one of the things that really stood out as I read through it is how much they touched on multidisciplinary care, where they had psychologists that are dealing with the psychological end of it, and physios that are maybe handling the bio, and and then the social factors that come into play, and the importance of communication between all parties when they're trying to help that person. And interesting, I'm sure we'll get into it when we're looking at the social aspects of the person returning to work, the importance of communication with the workplace from the people who are delivering care, so that it's more of a person-centered approach when you're trying to help that person get back to their job, or get back to those things that they enjoy doing.
What I found funny with this, though, when you think about it, you think about medicine, and you think about musculoskeletal care and MSK pain and whatnot, and you look at this model has been used for pain for 40 years, or it's been talked about for about 40 years. And the reasons that they say here was Waddell and Lozer. They observed that many of their patients with low back pain didn't improve after corrective surgery, so the pain could not be attributed to only biological influences. It's funny, though, because it makes you think, what happened to all the years before that when people didn't get better? It's funny how it took that long for people to actually start wondering if there's something else going on.
Yeah.
And now in hindsight, it seems it seems to make sense, but it's funny to think of how people must have thought about the body and pain.
Yeah, and really interesting that those two people that you mentioned, was it Waddell and Lozer?
Yeah,
Waddell and Lozer, that they were surgeons. Because I wouldn't have thought that was coming from surgeon, because we say it tongue in cheek a little bit, and maybe make fun a little bit, that we're like, oh, if you're a scalpel, you just want to cut everything.
Yeah.
Right. So great to see that it was surgeons who were looking at, hey, maybe we need to change the way that we're doing things. And also really interesting that, that happened 40 years ago. And maybe it's just because you and I haven't been therapists for 40 years, obviously, but we've only really seen it catch on and become more of a thing when we're helping people in the last 10 years.
Yeah. And I would
As
say
an actual model.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And even if I think, back to when I first started diving into the stuff and trying to understand it, and I think did my first CE course teaching in 2015. And I remember just kind of bringing these very basic ideas, because I was only still learning too, to courses, to try to be like, hey, there's some interesting stuff that's out there. Maybe, like, let's talk about this. And then that was kind of the general idea of those early course states. Nobody knew what biopsychosocial was then.
Yeah.
So
And
2015.
it's been around for 30 years.
Yeah. And so nobody knew it. And I I'd heard of it before, but I didn't really pay attention to it. Like, it didn't really mean much to me. I was like, oh yeah, okay, whatever. But it was interesting to see, like, those early days. And we know from our experiences, when we first started teaching together in 2018, we started talking about things and bring up the biopsychosocial and a little bit of myth busting in there, and some of the science of pain stuff, and how that stuff was completely new to like 99% of the people. Whereas now, I would say in the last 3 or 4 years, or 2 or 3 years particularly, everyone's heard of it. Yeah, it's a common term, and people can have a general idea of, oh, biopsychosocial, yeah, that's like treating the whole person. It's like person-centered care. What that exactly means and how do you do that in practice is still, that's the difficult thing, but that's what we call it, a practice, not a perfect, right? Is to that's the hard part, but at least people become more aware of it. But yeah, it's taken 40 years.
Yeah.
At least in our profession, where we are in our part of the world.
Yeah. But then you look at like the Louis Giffords that were doing this ages ago, right? So
yeah, exactly.
Like you said, it might be that it's our profession, our part of the world. Because I think Louis was a UK guy.
He was, yeah, in the 80s and 90s. Yeah.
So maybe that was more prevalent there than it was here, but we don't know.
I mean, and this, without going on too much of a tangent, which we might want to, and we'll see what happens here, is when we look at the stakeholders involved in our profession, at least here in BC, right? We got the association, we've got the college, the CMTBC, and then we've got all the schools and there's now 10 of them, maybe. I think it was probably about 2014, 2015, around there. If you tried to teach a Con Ed course
that said,
and it said it had biopsychosocial in it, they would not approve it. It was sort of out of scope.
Yeah.
With the argument being that they hadn't, well, really the idea was they had no idea what it meant. Yeah. So our own regulatory body had no idea what it meant. And even, our association and the schools and stuff still don't adequately teach this stuff. Like the association, they have conferences and they put out content out there, but I don't ever see anything on there being anything about biopsychosocial.
Yeah.
And but however, in Ontario,
they put out some really good stuff.
They had some great stuff there too. And so if we want to compare ourselves, right, to another province that's been around for a very long time in Ontario, regulated province, is what I meant to say if I didn't say that. There's been a province that's been around for a very long time. No. Don't massage. Sorry, I'm tired. Let's go back from the gym. My brain's a little bit foggy. They had a conference in 2019, which I was fortunate enough to be at. That was, I think it was called like biopsychosocial care or something for RMTs or something. So they actually had a conference. That was 3 years ago now. And then they've had other things subsequently, which have been kind of trying to bring this idea to the profession and to the members. So we don't have that here, and I really wish. This is a call to action thing. I wish the schools. I know some schools are great. I've talked to some of the people that are clinic directors and stuff at schools here, and they are trying to do it, but it's just not
widely accepted, and
it's just not widely accepted or maybe understood. Yeah. And so I would suggest anybody that's curious about what biopsychosocial means, this is actually a pretty good paper to start at.
Yeah. Well, and it's very cool. There was a lot of things in here as I read through that resonated with me because of my because of my background, and also because I'm somebody who works at a job in industry where people get hurt. So a lot of this really stood out to me. And it's funny, one of the guys at work told me, he's like, why don't you go to the chief and see if you can come in once a week and just do what you do with guys here who need the help. But I think there would be a big conflict of interest if I did that. If I was working on guys and WCB was like, well, you're one of his coworkers, you can't. I think there would be too much of a conflict of interest for me to do that, but it would be very cool to
Yeah,
be able
yeah,
to participate in that.
yeah.
And
That would be really cool, actually, because that would, you would have the social and the bio and the psycho all together,
yeah,
right? They'd be in the workplace, in with their colleagues and their social network. And then, yeah, you'd be getting them doing exercising, which would be bio and psycho, and social. It would be the whole thing, right? Or get them moving, or even if you're doing any hands-on stuff. I mean, that'd be a brilliant idea.
I think so. And I'd love to just take a portable table in and be able to set up the table in the gym and be able to go through rehab with guys and do some treatment. And I mean, guys are coming to me all the time anyway and being like, hey, this is sore, what should I do? So
Yeah.
it would be cool to just have, like, a day of clinic hours at the fire hall, so that somebody who needs it could come in and get what they need. But I think the problem is, once WCB or something like that was involved, they'd be looking and going, no, you can't have one of his coworkers doing the work, because we're not going to get an honest feedback about what's going on with them. I think there would be too much of a conflict of interest for them.
Yeah.
That would be very cool.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah. So just quickly skimming through, of course, we talk about psychological treatments when we're talking about the biopsychosocial, and quite often we're looking at things like mood disturbance and high levels of unhelpful thoughts, like catastrophization, the person kind of thinking that they're broken, and lowered self-efficacy. So when they talked about it throughout the paper, that's a lot of the things that they talked about. And that was where my understanding anyways, as I read through the paper, that those things were better handled by, say, a psychologist or a mental health expert, to be able to help them through that as part of that multidisciplinary care that we talked about a little bit at the beginning.
Yeah, this paper, what I thought was really interesting was they broke it down into that, like a psycho biosocial,
Okay, yeah.
And looked at the research, because I think it's just really important, that the common term, if you're a hammer, you see nails, right? And if you're a psychologist and you're treating people that are hurting, of course, you're going to be viewing them through a psychological lens. Of course, your interventions are going to be more on the psychological end of things, right? Just like if as massage therapists, we're treating people, we should be aware of these psychological and social stuff, but really, I mean, we're working primarily on bio things, through movement and touch and exercise, a little bit of education, but most our more focus is going to be bio. Like, so I like that they broke it down to this and talked about like what was included in psychological research and what was included in bio and what was included in the social stuff. But what I thought was really interesting, though, was the little quote here says that there is positive effects, there is positive outcomes seen with these psychological interventions that focus on the things you said, thought processes, beliefs, behaviors, this type of thing. But it says that the size of these effects have generally been found to be small or moderate in systematic reviews of randomized controlled trials with chronic pain samples. So with this, I mean, goes to show us is that, and I think if you look at all the research, they probably, I think they quote this all throughout this paper, is that it doesn't really seem to matter what you do when you look at the literature. The outcomes are all relatively small to moderate at best.
Yeah.
So what that can sound to some people defeatist, to me that sounds, that actually sounds pretty good, because if you're getting something done or you're doing something, you're seeking care and someone is providing care to you, chances are you're probably going to feel better than not. So doing something like this is good. And that lets us know that there's not like a right or wrong. But they do say in here, though, is it's not necessarily providing a specific treatment. It's finding the treatment that works for that person.
Yeah. Right.
So it's not like you need this. It's like, what's going to work for this person, this presentation here today?
Yeah.
I like that, rather than what's the person need, rather than what are we going to do to the person?
Yeah. And interesting, as we go through, like, there's a couple things that stand out to me is when they're talking about the psychological treatments, they mentioned how there hasn't been a lot of research about involving the person's family. But one place that they did look at, and I would like to know if this was any of Melanie Noel's research with stuff that she does with kids, but it showed that the more that the parents are involved in helping the kids, it can actually have a positive effect on the parent and the pain
Yeah.
that you experience. So when you're teaching, how do they say it? When they're teaching kids and adolescents about different strategies that they could use, whether it's communication or how they handle things at school, and the more that the parents involved, it can actually have a positive effect on the pain experience that a parent feels,
Yeah.
which is unreal.
Isn't that great? Yeah.
Yeah,
Stuff.
yeah,
And there's something that I thought was really interesting was when they were talking about how, yeah, when the way kids are treated with chronic pain
hmm,
is very different from how adults are treated with chronic pain.
totally.
Because in adults, it's like the individual is being treated, whereas in kids, they involve the whole kind of their social network, their family, which is, I mean, it makes sense, but it's just funny how you're like, oh, you're no longer a child, you're now an adult, so therefore we're just screw off family. Like we're not gonna involve you, right? That's not included. But I guess it does make sense though, because the kids need to be cared for, and so the parents have to be involved in their care. As an adult, you're independent, at least in most of our cultures,
Yeah,
we become adults and we distance ourselves from our family a little bit.
yeah, yeah. Or different circumstances. I mean, you look at me, 47, single, no family in town. So the experience that I would go through if I was experiencing pain is a lot different than, say, somebody who has a family at home that they come home to. Right.
Right.
And if the kids were dealing with something, then the parents dealing with that is going to have more of that connection feeling between the family and probably better care and all those things, especially if, say, the doctor or the physiotherapist is in really good or having good communication with the family about
Mhm.
pain and education and all those things, then it's a more cooperative experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Which would be more biopsychosocial. That would actually be a better
Yeah.
application of the model, right?
Yeah.
Involving everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, they went into and they talked about a lot of the biological stuff and separating that into different categories, about how people are experiencing pain and whether it's peripheral or central mechanisms, inflammatory pain, chronic pain, and all those kind of things. And then talked about the treatments that they could use for those things. And what I found very interesting is that when they started talking about exercise, because exercise, obviously, I'm a big fan of that. But when they talked about the exercise, they were talking about usually exercise is driven towards building muscle or loading the joints and doing these other things. Whereas they found, or my understanding is, they found if you geared the exercise more towards just what they were doing at work or their chosen activity and getting them back to doing that thing, then they had more success.
Which makes sense because it's that your task or your goal, your functional desire or whatever it's tailored towards that specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I thought it was interesting though that it says exercise is, is considered, they consider that bio, but I think it's almost, I mean, obviously there's bio going on there, but I would say that,
As well.
yeah, like it can't just be bio because you're not, there's going to be psychological and probably social, unless you're like in your garage by yourself. Okay, there's not like a social influence there, but there's a psychological influence. Like exercise is, if something you value, something is you enjoy doing, then it's not just going to be bio. So I thought it was funny when they said it's exercise is considered a bio intervention because like, well, I think it probably includes the whole biopsychosocial.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's I'm trying to remember who the presenter was in San Diego this year when he stood up and he said, "Okay, who wants to go home and do some homework tonight?" And then he's like, "Yeah, neither do your patients. So stop giving them homework. Stop giving them exercises to do." And I think
I forgot about that. Yeah, that was great.
right, which was brilliant because I think that's where I was on a podcast a little while ago with some of our friends down in the US, and when I was talking about therapeutic exercise and they're saying it's not in our scope, I'm like, well, movement is. So I think we have to start also approaching this and being like, well, let's stop calling it exercise. let's just call it movement, and let's just talk about what meaningful movement is for this person, and how do we get them back to that meaningful movement. And that meaningful movement might be a specific task that they do at their job that they can't do right now. So how do we change that task, or how do we make it so they can do that task so it becomes more meaningful and they feel more fulfilled at their job, or whatever the recreation thing is that they're trying to get back to doing.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. Hey, so movement is allowed, but exercise isn't within.
Yeah, well, and it's funny.
How do they define exercise?
So my understanding of it, because when I was on the podcast, there was two folks from the US, and I said, but you guys can do active range of motion and passive range of motion in a treatment. And they're like, yeah, that's fine. I'm like, so why can't you do movement? They're like, it's that we can't prescribe exercise for them to do at home. I'm like, but what about if your prescription was go work in the garden for a half an hour? They're like, yeah, we can do that. I'm like, so just prescribe movement then.
Yeah, that's so weird.
What about if it's get on the ground and play with your kids?
Yeah.
What if it's, so let's change the opinion around those things. And I think a lot of times we're also really, really scared that we're going outside our scope, and we might get disciplined for going outside of our scope. And then as soon as it's got the word in this case, as soon as it has the word exercise attached to it, people automatically say, oh, well, that's out of scope. But if we say it's movement, there's no reason it can't be in your scope.
Yeah, just move lots. That's your prescription.
Yeah,
and that's exercise.
Yeah, there's no reason you can't.
Things you want to do.
Somebody comes in and they've got a shoulder issue. There's no reason you can't grab their arm and passively move their shoulder and get it into different ranges, or do some adapted movements with them. You're not prescribing an exercise for them to take home. You're not prescribing something. You're just helping them get back to doing the movements that they enjoy or that are meaningful to them. So, and to me, it makes more of a psychosocial, not psychosocial sense, but it makes more sense to me to talk about, rather than us giving a treatment or delivering a treatment, we're engaging in treatment with our people.
Yeah.
Right? Because we're engaging and educating and conversing and finding out what's important to people, rather than us just saying, okay, get on the table and I'm going to do this to you.
Yeah. I 100% agree. I think that's such a great point to make, right? You're engaging with the treatments. You're not just doing it. You're not doing something to them. Now, sometimes it's great. Like, I mean, sometimes if I go for massage, I often want something done to me because I don't necessarily have something wrong that is bugging me. It's just like, I just want to feel good. That's different, right? Like, there's the feel good. And I think that's just a point distinction to make, is that, yeah, you can go and get on the table and someone like spoil yourself. That's fantastic. But if it's something that you're suffering with, it's bugging you for a long time, and, that passive approach isn't working, yeah, try and engage a bit more with your clientele.
Yeah. Like we've talked about so many times before too, we're fortunate here because we have so many people that have unlimited benefits that maybe they come in once a week, but that's just an hour break from life that they get, which is good. And there's no reason you can't just do a passive relaxation massage. Maybe I shouldn't say that a relaxation massage is passive, because you're still having an influence, but in those cases, there's no reason. But somebody comes in and they're like, I'm having a hard time moving my shoulder or moving my hip or my knee or whatever, then, we want to engage more with them and figure out how we can get them back to moving that shoulder, or so that they can do the things important to them. Yeah.
I think it's great. I love that term, engaging in treatment, rather than just doing something, doing a treatment, engaging in treatment. I think that's a very important distinction to make. So hopefully they'll catch on.
I hope
you should do like a social media campaign, #, engaging in treatment or something.
Yeah. Well, I'm working on some stuff now that doing some thought reversals and things about that to
cool.
Hopefully make that a thing, but we'll see. We'll see if anybody wants to listen to me. That's the big thing.
Yeah. Well, some people listen to this podcast, so enough to keep doing them. So there we go.
Yeah.
What it was, so just kind of keep talking about this, the bio thing, or the bio, and just kind of expanding on the bio to expand into the biopsychosocial. And this is gonna be a bias statement here, but it's okay. It's our podcast. I just think it's really important for us to emphasize that even though we are educated in a bio-dominant, a biomedical thing, and we are hands-on therapy is mostly mostly bio. There is always going to be psychosocial stuff, right? With the movement exercise, coming for a treatment, there's an interaction between two people that's social, right? And there's psychological, social stuff. So we are, regardless of what you think of the biopsychosocial, every aspect of the human is being engaged with during a treatment. And this is the thing is, though, I find interesting is I find it very difficult to understand how any other MSK profession other than massage therapists and physical therapists are able to actually provide a full BPS experience in their treatment. Like if you're coming in and say it's chiropractic and it's like 5 minutes and you're just getting adjusted and gone, is that biopsychosocial? Like, can you actually apply all the kind of aspects of this? I don't know. I would say that I think what we have, us and physios, is we have the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some physio appointments are short, but I would say on average they're 30 to 45 minutes long, at least where we are.
And
I think
some chiropractic appointments are too.
What's that?
In fairness, some chiropractic appointments are as well, depending on the
yeah. I'm not saying all. I'm just saying that, like, if you look in general, the two professions that are set up to be able to really do this properly if we have proper education and proper understanding, I think we should. Chiropractors don't think you're listening to this podcast anyway, but massage therapists, I think we really are set up to do this because we have so much time with people. We can listen and validate, and we can educate, and we can rule out red flags, and we can reassure if it's, there's nothing nasty going on, and we can provide touch in a soothing, safe, comfortable environment, and educate and engage with people to do the things that are important to them. And that's something you can't do in 10 minutes, 15 minutes.
No.
And some people, I'm sure somebody's going to probably be like, yeah, you can, you're full of shit. Okay, maybe. But I would say I'm not convinced.
No.
You need time to do this. And so when you're looking at just quick appointments, boom, 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 those are bio nature, bio focused. You're missing the bigger part of treating the person.
And interesting, if you look at the psychosocial aspect of things, I don't know of any, or if there are any psychologists or counselors that offer a 15-minute treatment. They're all 45 minutes or an hour.
Exactly.
Right? Because they want to have a long discussion with people. They want to have that chat, and they want to figure out what's going on with them. So, when we look at the other aspects, there's very few that are that short of a treatment, unless it's maybe a quick check-in about something.
Right. Even medical doctors, right? Like you go see a medical doctor for something, like they're going to rule, they may like, oh yeah, psychosocial stuff might be, that stuff happens, but they're looking at the bio, they're looking, what's the disease, what's the pathology, what can I rule out here, right? So it's, when you read this stuff, and we can go on and talk about, how this is often applied in these kind of interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary pain clinics, those the appointments people have are long.
Yeah,
you need time. This is something you can't just like have. I don't think you can have like a high volume biopsychosocial practice and do really good work with engaging with people
in a small amount of time.
In a small amount of time, I think it'd be really hard.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So this is where I think we could get into it now. Is when we talked about they're talking about the social aspects, and they talked a lot about the workplace and people who are on a return to work program. And this is where it kind of hit home to me because of my past, being a first aid attendant in a sawmill and watching, dealing with people who got injured, and then watching them deal with compensation and coming back to work. And they really focused on this, about the importance of communication with the workplace and how important that is for, the person who's trying to get back to their job, where the physiotherapist or the therapist who's helping them should be in contact with the workplace, but then also in the workplace that the supervisor should be trained in how to speak appropriately to the person who's injured. And to me, that's just like, that would be phenomenal compared to what I've seen in the past, because from what I've seen in the past, companies would always be like, oh, safety is our number one priority, until it cost $1 to change the safety program. And granted, this is back in like 2006 when I was doing this. So hopefully things have changed a lot since then. But I just think it's amazing that they looked at it and said, if you're in communication with the workplace more, then you'll have better outcomes for the person who's trying to get back to work.
Right.
Just phenomenal. And that's where, like we talked a little bit before we came online, that's where our friend Corey Blickenstaff, who is a physio who works in a workplace and helps people who are injured, like how that, like the outcomes that he must have compared to somebody who was maybe offsite. And I don't know if there's ever been a study done on it, but it must be amazing. And give the workers confidence that they've got somebody there who's there to help should they get injured. So the social aspects of that must be phenomenal.
Yeah, it would make sense to me. It just, I mean, okay, sometimes things that make sense logically aren't always true, but it, making an informed opinion based on some of this body of research, if a large enough workplace could afford it, and places probably could, right? A large enough workplace could afford to have a physiotherapist, for example, on staff or on a contract to come by. I mean, that would be such a benefit, and I bet you I would love to see if that increased productivity, if that decreased missed
lost time
work, less work safe or workplace injuries. I think that would be such a great thing. And there's probably studies out there, and if anybody has them, please send them our way. That would be such a brilliant thing. And maybe there's certain parts of the world they do it in, but I've never heard of that here in Canada.
No,
I've never heard of somebody having like an on-site or somebody that comes by once a week or whatever, or every 2 weeks to treat staff.
I'm actually starting to hear of it more because I have a friend who is an athletic therapist, and I can't remember the name of the company, but she had me come in to do some first aid stuff with the company, and she's there as like a director of like exercise and things. So they have an exercise room there for the employees where she can take them in. She has somebody who's a massage therapist that comes in once a week, and she organizes all of this for everybody who works for that company. So it must be catching on a little bit, to the point that she's got a full-time job doing this.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Yeah,
great.
Yeah, it's very cool.
You think it's such a perk too as a worker, particularly in the environment we're in right now, where it's impossible to find workers. Like everyone's hiring, and what a great perk it would be if you're like, hey, come join our workplace. We got massage and physio, athletic therapy. Come in, it's all included as part of your
as part of working
package. Yeah, that'd be brilliant.
Yeah, I'm sure it would be a draw.
Yeah, huge.
And I know like bigger companies like Google and that have like full-time massage therapists that work there and things like that. So, but I mean, that's a multi-billion-dollar company. So, compared to smaller companies, that's a lot tougher. But one of the things that I think is important to touch on that I would have loved to see is they didn't talk in here about educating the workplace, about educating all of the other employees who aren't injured. And I don't mean that like when somebody's injured, the rest of the people have to be educated about that person's injury. It's educating them about why a return to work program is important. Because like for instance, when I worked at the mill, it was always, if somebody was off injured, they'd come back to a place that's, full of bravado, that guys are going, you're just a wimp, you're just trying to get a claim, or you're an idiot, there's no reason, you weren't hurt. And so when you look at that social aspect of it, that could be really detrimental for the person who's trying to get back to work. So it would be really interesting to see if there was a really good education program they could do in those places to be like, hey, we know that we're going to have better outcomes if this person isn't made fun of, if your opinions are kept to yourself, and we're able to work through whatever the person's injury is, and we're here to support you as well, so that if you get hurt, we can take the same approach with you. And research has shown us we have better outcomes, and this is going to be better for your home life, it's going to be better for when you have to pay the mortgage and all those other things, and explain to them the benefits of that, because I think that would make a drastic improvement on those return to work programs with people coming in.
Well, I think that sounds like a brilliant idea. Education, regardless, it seems like it doesn't matter what the topic is. Education often seems to be the answer.
Yeah.
The more you understand what's going on, the more accepting we are, the better decisions we make about things
Yeah.
generally, right? These things all play a role. So yeah, why would that be any different in the workplace? I think it would be a brilliant thing to educate the workers as well about what's going on and why it's important. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be cool. Maybe I should approach the fire hall about that and be like, hey, once a month I could do like a safety education thing or something.
You totally should. I think you should see it. I think it'd be probably rewarding as well as probably see. I would be surprised if you didn't see um, positive benefits from that with your coworkers.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's great because we have a light duty program because we do our own dispatch. So if somebody's injured, we have it set up that they can actually just go and do dispatch. So they get to sit in the room and they're answering the phones and doing all that stuff. So they're not out, having to fight a structure fire, but they still get an hour or two a day to go in the gym and do some movement and, try to be healthy. So it's a pretty good program, but there's definitely improvements we could make to it.
Well, and I mean, from reading this paper here too, it's definitely the workplace, engaging in the workplace is underutilized. One of the quotes here says, engaging with the workplace as part of the treatment seems to be rarely attempted. I don't have the paper right in front of me. I just got some notes I made. And I think it said there was like maybe only 3 papers that actually involved, family or social networks in kind of the pain rehab. So it's rarely done.
Yeah, I'm just scrolling through to see if I can find it, but that's basically what it said, is that it's rarely done in that way. So yeah, and I think maybe the difficulty as well is that, if we're trying to help somebody who's injured, the workplace isn't necessarily going to want to talk to us, right? So it might be a big hurdle for us to overcome if we're trying to engage in that way, whereas they'd probably be more likely to listen to a physio if they were call in. But hopefully if it's a multidisciplinary approach and we're working with a physio and with somebody, then we can have some input on that as well. But it would be great if, even if you could, if you could have the person go back to work and say, hey, if your employer wants to talk to me, I'm happy to have a chat with them about, what we can do to help you out. Then that might be an approach where the employee is making the approach rather than us approaching the employer.
Yeah. I think one of the barriers you have, though, at least in our profession here in BC and probably throughout Canada as well, is that nobody wants to work with the WorkSafe or like workers' compensation.
Yeah.
Because it's a pain in the butt, a lot of paperwork for like no pay. So
Yeah.
even though it's probably would be really good to have more of this return to work thing involved in our profession, and these opportunities to be able to go into people's work, finances are gonna win, right?
Yeah.
Like I could treat somebody in my clinic and make this much money, or I could go over here and leave my office and treat people that are returning to work and make like no money almost.
Yeah.
Right? What am I going to do? People are going to look after their families, they're going to pay their bills, their mortgages, their food, their gas. They're going to stay in the clinic. So ideally it would be not lovely to do this, but I would think that in a lot of these cases, the money's not there for it.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, again, hopefully that's changing as well, because 10 years ago there was absolutely no money.
Yeah.
For us to be able to do it, and now there's a bit. So hopefully that will continue to go up and we can have more of a role.
Yeah, well, for sure. No, yeah, I think it would definitely be beneficial.
Yeah.
To kind of wrap up the rest of this paper, they talked about interdisciplinary biopsychosocial treatments for chronic pain. And Camper did a review and said, despite their concerns about definitions of biopsychosocial interventions, Camper et al. Found that a coordinated intervention covering several domains of the biopsychosocial model and delivered by clinicians from different backgrounds is more likely to benefit patients with chronic low back pain in the long term than is usual care or physical treatment alone. Which I thought was good because it talks about like the interdisciplinary, right? So involving multiple different disciplines. The problem that you're going to find, I mean, obviously in a like this was in a like a pain kind of rehab or pain clinic, all the treating clinicians are going to be working from a similar model and understanding about pain, and they're going to stay in their lanes of what their areas of expertise and education are. What we see all the time in practice, and I've seen other papers on this, and I don't have a reference here, unfortunately, is that there is an association between seeing too many different people and poor longer term outcomes. But what I understood from this and other parts of this paper is that you see multiple people as long as you're working together under the same framework to provide the best care for that person that they need. So it's an important distinction to make, because I know oftentimes in the courses I teach, I'm like, yeah, the more people that someone sees, the worse their outcomes tend to be, right? Yeah. Seen that clinically, as well as there is data to support that. But that's if you're getting, I think it's if you're getting different stories, different, you see your physio, your chiro, your massage, your osteopath, your acupuncturist, your medical doctor, specialists, they're all telling you something different. They're all doing something different to you, and there's no coordinated care. I think that's when you get these problems. But it seems this one, if you have a singular model of care, everyone's kind of following this biopsychosocial, and they're working together, outcomes tend to be better than doing nothing, or than what they call usual care, which is usually medications or rest.
Yeah. And I think I've seen it so many times in my career where, somebody's coming to see me on a Tuesday, they're going to their chiropractor Wednesday, they're going to the doctor Thursday, they're going to physio Friday, and they're just appointment hopping. And the added stress that gives them of having to go and see all these other practitioners to satisfy what the insurance company wants them to do is that added stress that's taking away from a better outcome. So like you said, if it was all under one roof and, it was a conjoined group of people that are trying to provide that care in a reasonable amount of time and things like that, then likely to have better outcomes. But the current way that it's done, or that I've seen, is when you're constantly hopping from practitioner to practitioner and appointments all week, it's just stressing people out.
Yeah. And I've never, well, we're gonna be careful saying never and always, right? I very rarely have seen that benefit people by seeing multiple practitioners over time forever, years and years and years, because they're all just looking for that fix, right? Everything's just like, I'm fixed. Oh, I got scar tissue here. Oh, this is adhered. Oh, this is weak. This is tight. This is short. This is inhibited. This is out. They're constantly just being put back together is the kind of general understanding they have about their body, and that rarely works.
Yeah, and each practitioner is trying to make a living and rebooking people in.
Yeah, that's what money talks, right? That the financial aspect of it is powerful, and that's that's a different conversation, I guess. But that's comes down to the ethics of it, right?
Yeah,
we have to pay our bills, but ethically, if we know better, should we still be doing that? Probably not.
Yeah. I know I've fallen on the sword a few times and told people, you're going to all these appointments, don't come and see me next week. Take the day off.
Yeah.
Take a rest. I mean, somebody else will book in. It's not that big of a deal. Just go take a rest. But it always comes back to that same thing. And really what this entire paper is about is patient-centered care.
Yeah. Patient-centered care and providing team-based care seems to be the thing too, right? That it involves all of the domains. And it's what I understand is it seems very difficult for one specific professional to treat all domains, because we're not educated that way. We're not biopsychosocial therapists. It's not like its own brand of
that would be a 10-year course.
Yeah. What's that?
That would be a 10-year course.
Yeah. Oh,
learn how to do manual therapy and psychotherapy and social therapy. You'd be
so
it's not a terrible thing, but you'd be in school for a long time to be able to do all that.
So I think what we should get from this is that we have to start thinking about psychosocial. We start thinking there's a lot of influences on people. We never want to just say it's just the bio. We don't want to swing too far. We don't want to say it's just the psychosocial. We want to kind of play in that middle, so pendulum's not swinging too far, and be aware of is this more of a bio driver? Oh yeah, you've got it, like there's tissue injury, there's inflammation, there's a break, there's whatever, there's something, or is this more like, is there more psychosocial things going on that are amplifying kind of some of that nociceptive sensory stuff that's going on, right? These things all work together, and it's part of the problem we see in the research, as well as what we see in these online discussions, is it's like one swing to the right, one swing to the left, it goes back and forth, right? And the quote that the authors use here, which I thought was great, it said, when they're talking about biopsychosocial interventions, it says, working closely together with regular team meetings, face-to-face or online, agreement on diagnosis, therapeutic aims, and plans for treatment and review. It is important to know that emphasis on the need for the treatment team to reach agreement on diagnosis, goals, and treatment plans, hopefully before the plan is implemented. And this is just basically saying, like, this is what you should be doing in an ultimately multidisciplinary treatment environment. But that in reality, at least for our profession, and we've probably talked about this before, that's very difficult. When you're a one-on-one with a person in a room for 45, 60 minutes and you're busy and everyone else is busy, it's very, very difficult to coordinate care appropriately, at least in the way things are set up here. But ideally, in a proper pain clinic, this is how things should be done. And I think some places they're doing like that. I can't speak from my own knowledge, but I would hope that some places they do things that way.
Yeah. Hopefully that's coming. But we know how long it takes to implement research. So as long as we're working, as long as we're working towards providing better care, whether it's individually or as a team, and as long as we're going after patient-centered care, then hopefully that means we're doing whatever's best for the person in front of us.
Brilliant.
Okay. All right, everybody. We'll see you next time on the podcast.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. These kind of topics are what we are all about. If you'd like to learn more, go to our websites,
themtdc.com or ericpurvis.com. If you know of any other therapists that could benefit from this, please tell them to subscribe.